So, Tew, firstly, welcome back. I'm genuinely delighted to have you. I said in the sort of advert for this session that you bring wisdom and a grounded approach to it, which is really much appreciated. And actually, particularly on this topic, because kind of Aikido is seen as a spiritual path by a lot of people, and it's kind of a word I struggle with a bit. Because I don't have any strong religious affiliations, and I tend to link it with religion, rightly or wrongly. So when Demetra said, you've often talked about secular spiritualism, my ears pricked up, because I think that might be something I can relate to a little more. So my first question is, and I think it's a quick yes probably, is Tai Chi seen as a spiritual path by most of its practitioners?
Not most, but the people I practice with, I think we're all in agreement that it's a spiritual path, spiritual physical path. But not all. I mean, some people do Tai Chi without really wanting to go into that area, and that's their choice. They do Tai Chi for fighting or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that compares very, very much as with Aikido, actually. I would say that that's typically the case as well, but not that many would call it a spiritual path. The vast majority see it more as a martial art.
But then I would counter that by saying that the traditional martial arts are a spiritual path. Okay.
So what's your definition of a spiritual path?
Well, I thought you might start with that. and I want to answer you really by what is actually happening in my life right now and what has been happening today. Just to answer it, not with words, more concept, and this is what spirituality and so on and so forth. You can find all that in the library or in the internet or whatever, and there are some really good books about it as well, secular spirituality. But I just wanted to share with you an experience which I'm involved in right now, and even it's the background of this meeting. So today, I don't know whether your group knows this, but I'm not just a Tai Chi teacher, but a big part of my life is actually working with people who are dying and with the health professionals who I train to avoid burnout and for them to bring this, to bring spirituality, if you like, into their work, especially in palliative care and intensive care. And I work with people who want to prepare themselves when they either they've been introduced to me or they've come through word of mouth or whatever it is. And I don't just accompany people who are dying, but sometimes people who are ill, who have something like motor neuron, or Parkinson's. I'm accompanying a Russian gentleman with Parkinson's, for example, or something that is not just like they're preparing to die right now, but they've reached a certain critical stage in their illness, and they have chosen to prepare themselves, or they've been introduced to the work of preparing themselves. And anyway, I want to mention this man who's called Juan Ramon, because I've asked him permission as well. I said, look, tonight I'm going to give a talk on spirituality, and can I mention what we've done together? And he said, sure. And anyway, Juan Ramon came to me in November, and he'd been given 1 more month to live by the oncologist. He's had half his tongue taken out and his throat, all cancer, and then metastasized into the bone and the lung. And it wasn't actually his idea. His sister trained with somebody who I've trained, and the sister suggested that Juan Ramon might come. So I said, look, I'm not selling this, and I don't want to push this, but if you like, we can work together if you like, and if you find it useful. And he said, yeah, I really want to try. So my first question to him was, do you have any practice? Do you have any background? Do you have a religion? Do you have a faith? And he said, nothing, absolutely nothing. My parents were Catholic, but they gave it up, like a lot of people in Spain. You know, unlike, let's say, in Greece, where the Orthodox is still very much part of the culture, the Spanish of a certain generation, they kind of threw out the Catholicism, you know, from the Civil War they had and everything. Anyway, he said, no, I was brought up nothing, absolutely nothing, you know. And so I said, and no practices, nothing. He said, no, I've never had any practice. I said, and you want to do something now, you want to prepare? And he said, yes. I said, why? Why do you want to prepare? And he said, I don't know exactly why I want to prepare, but I do want to participate in my own process. And that time, remember, he'd been given 1 month, you know, and he said, I just want to spend this month as well as I can. And so I said, are you is part of your intuition that there is maybe something after you go through the door? And he said, yes. He says, it's irrational, the very rational mind, man, this Juan Ramon, you know, he owns a delicatessen, you know, and he's very about business. He's a businessman, he owns a small business. He said, yeah, but I feel, and from the things I've read, but it's more my feeling, my gut feeling, that there is something when I go through, you know. And he said, but even before that, I'm not prepared for the steps of going through yet. I feel totally unprepared, and I'd like to prepare, and I'd like to participate in the process, in my own process. So this is one aspect of spirituality, if you like. I want to quote you something which I read a few months back, written by 2 nurses, hospital nurses, called Ruth Murray and Judith Zenner. And they wrote this article on spirituality and nursing. I'm going to quote, the spiritual dimension tries to be in harmony with the universe and strives for answers about the infinite, and comes into focus when the person faces emotional stress, physical illness, or death, right? So when they're facing a kind of crisis, and this has been my experience, you know, and you might say, yeah, they're in fear, you know, they're afraid, as you and I might be facing our mortality, you know, imminent mortality. And so you suddenly think, what's it all been about? You know, is there something afterwards? Can I prepare for this? And there's this sense of not having any preparation at all. And that's how people come to me generally, who are preparing. They have they don't come from a religion. Because usually if they come from a religion, they'll go to their priest, or they'll go to their monk, or whatever it is, and they have a set of things to do. But the people who come to me are secular, generally, in that either they've thrown religion away, or the religion that they have had in their culture does not serve them in this phase of their life, you know, in this sort of final phase of their life. Anyway, with Juan Ramon, we began from zero. And I said, really, I wanted to do what he felt he needed to do. And I said, well, what do you need to do? And he, the usual thing of making peace with his family, with his parents, with his ex-wife, and so on, you know, those kind of things. And to very, very, very earthly, banal things like, you know, making a will and making sure that his second wife was not done out of her, you know, her share, and so on. But then on the spiritual level, and this is where, you know, I think much better to describe what we've been doing rather than sort of talking about it conceptually or philosophically. On the spiritual level, I said, well, where are you? How are you living this And he said, I'm all over the place. Some days I'm in such fear, I just sit here trembling, you know, and some days I just don't feel I'm connected to anything now because I'm already projecting the pain I'll be going through. He was already going through pain, but he was controlled at that time. So the practices that we started to do were practices of centering, of being quiet, of connecting to himself, connecting to his presence, connecting to the space around him. And this is what we've been doing, actually very little more than that. Sometimes for the pain, doing a kind of humming sound just to ease the pain, to help to ease the pain. And then today he wrote saying, look, they've just put me in palliative care and they've begun to sedate me, you know, which means, if you know what palliative care is and what they do in palliative care, sedation really means putting you to sleep. You know, it's not euthanasia, it's not sort of brutally finishing everything off, but when the pain is so bad, it's better to they give it by drips these days, sedation, and the person just goes gently to sleep. But I mean, we can think of that as a very nice way to go and everything, but there's a whole process before that. Remember, this is 6 months after he was meant to have gone. And in these 6 months, this extraordinary things happened. You know, I feel really privileged and a great honor to have accompanied him, because from nothing, and perhaps from the desperation of facing his mortality, he did the practices really, you know, regularly, you know, with great discipline. And we were meeting twice a week at the beginning, and we just got to places just with a naturalness, you know, deeply into these places, which at first were very difficult because he was so fragmented and full of fear and everything. But eventually, by last February, March, he was getting into this deep places of peace where I felt sort of touched by the peace that he was getting to, if you follow what I'm saying, you know? And I felt accompanied by him, and we were doing together. And by that time, by March, I was already getting him to give the instructions. I was no longer giving the instructions. So he was saying what he was doing for both of us. And it was all on screen, by the way. We met once, we just met once in the spring. And another thing I wanted to share with you was that because he didn't have any martial arts background, no Taoism, no Buddhism or anything like that, I just felt that it would be just completely a burden to start using Buddhist terms or Taoist terms or anything like that. And this I'd learned years ago, about 20 years ago, when I first came to recognize the importance of secular spirituality, was when I was accompanying the children in this hospice that I worked in Bangkok. They were children who were dying from secondaries from AIDS, full-blown AIDS and stuff. And these children had no time to absorb, and they weren't just Buddhist children. They were Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, nothing in particular, but they were children who had not had time to be educated and initiated into Christian language or Buddhist language or whatever. But they needed your presence. They needed compassion. They needed warmth. They needed, you know, something authentic, an authentic humanity at their side, you know. And anyway, I don't want to go back there too much, but I learned from them to stop using Buddhist terms, which I had done before with the people that I'd accompanied. That was my training, you know, so I trot out the Buddhist practices using the Buddhist terms, and I was accompanying Buddhists, you know, before that. So it worked, you know, and they could get it, and they'd done the practice. But here I was with the children who hadn't been initiated, hadn't done any practice, but who still needed the same qualities, if you know what I mean: compassion, presence, warmth, transcendence as well. So I learned a lot from them. But coming back to Juan Ramon, to this man who is actually dying right now as I'm speaking, he you know, I realized at the beginning, if I was going to put in some Buddhist terms here, Buddhist or Taoist terms there, or explain it in this way, would be a waste of his time too, to sort of say, well, what, you know, can you explain that? There wasn't time, especially when we first started, because there was only a month. You know, there wasn't time to sort of talk about the Tao and all these kind of things. It was just, he wanted to prepare himself. He wanted not to be fragmented, to be whole, to connect with himself, you know, to prepare for whatever was coming through the door, right? And this was the practice. So although I was using practices which were basically Buddhist and Taoist, you know, I wasn't using the terms at all. And this has been a challenge to me over all these years that I've accompanied people who have not been Buddhist. Of course, if they're Buddhist, you know, or they've done Tai Chi and everything, to talk about Yo and Wu, the substantial or the tangible, and the no form, it, you know, makes perfect sense. But to people, and most of the people I've accompanied over these years have not had any background like that. So instead of even talking about meditation, I don't use the word nowadays unless it's appropriate, because it's got so much baggage and so on. You know, just pause, silence, stillness, you know, and instead of emptiness, space, and so on. You know, just very, these are secular terms. This is what secular to me means. Make it understandable. Take it out of the context of, if you've read your Dalai Lama or whatever it is, you'll understand this term. You don't need to. You can distill it all from there and just use everyday terms. This is what the children have taught me, and all the people, the non-Buddhist, non-Taoist people I've accompanied over the year. And you can still do the same practices. So I've got nothing against, I haven't thrown my Buddhism away. I haven't thrown my Tao, what the Tao has given me away, but it's the question of transmitting it that's so important, you know, that you don't have to sort of start using Chinese terms, you know, to get to the same energy. I hope
that really speaks to me, because much of my own Aikido journey has been about finding ways of transmitting what we're doing so that people can experience it as quickly as possible through the language that they understand and experiences that they understand. And, you know, that's, I think, so important. So I think what you're doing is fantastic. So is it fair to say that when people are asking you to take them through this process, they're all going through a similar set of processes? They're all wanting to kind of connect with themselves and find some peace, and or does it vary quite a lot?
Thank you for reminding me of another point I wanted to get across. Secular. I think there's a kind of aspect of secularity, which doesn't mean just stepping aside from the structure, which is religion. Religion is structured. It's a structured set of beliefs, church, pope, priests, monks, all these things in the structure. I'm not against any of it. But the secular part is for the people who really don't need to go there. You know, if you need that, if it helps you, if it gives you more support, you know, to have that structure, that religious structure and the belief systems, fine. I've always said, fine, stick to it. But the important thing is not just to believe it intellectually, but to live it, you know, to have assimilated. But in the secular world, there's no authority there to interpret your experiences. You're directly with the experience. See? And your experience counts. Your individual experience counts. But part of the whole point of secularity, I think, is that you come to also acknowledge that you're not separate. So there's a secularity implies a sense of the collective. So your experience, let's say fear, you know, which comes up a lot in my work when I accompany people, there's fear, natural, normal, you know, but your fear and my fear are not the same fears, you see, they're not the same fears, and yet we can empathize, you know, I can hear your fear with my fear, I can hear the fear of the person who I'm accompanying with my own fears. So it's very important, this sense of empathy, you know, empathy, which is connection, connectedness to the collective. So there's a sense in secular spirituality of the individual and the uniqueness of each life and each individual. Even though you might share the same illness, no two people will share the same way of living that illness, you know? So you've got the uniqueness, and then you've got the universal, which is the collective. So when we talk of secular, it's not sort of you alone, you know, and your experience alone matters. It's your experience, but in the context of a collective, which has enormous implications, because if you do feel that, if you do connect like that, then of course there's a sense of responsibility as well. And there are very obvious things like, you know, let's say we all want peace, and we all want to live peacefully and in harmony and comfortably, right? Each of us, you know, will define that in our own way. We all want that. But then in the secular vision, I think we come to the next step, which is that you can't do that by yourself. And this is what, let's say, climate change is about. This is what a more equitable economic society is about, you know? You can't be well by yourself. So the secular vision is a vision connected to the collective, which also means connected to nature, which is why climate change, the whole point of climate change is a secular issue. But a secular issue not just because we happen to not believe that God created the trees or whatever it is, you know, or whatever philosophical take we have on it, but in the sense that what happens to the trees and the rivers and the air and the earth is part of us. And this is a sense of the deep ecology that each of us holds. We are part of the seasons, and we are responsible for what happens in the seasons by the way we live, and the way we treat each other, and the way we treat nature, and so on. This is quite new, you know, because up to the time, I would put it at about in the 70s, really, when this movement started to really take off, you know, that there was this arrogance that man, and usually it's men, you know, can do anything to nature. We have the right to observe nature, and then to dominate nature, to manipulate nature, to gain as much as possible, to destroy nature, actually, to destroy the elements. And this has changed beautifully in our lifetime, even though it's almost too late. But this is part of secularism as well. Yes. Now, the secularism is not just about us, men and women and children, but about our place in the world and with each other, our relationship to ourselves and to each other. And it begins with this ecology. It begins with this, but it connects to the collective. I'll come back to Juan Ramon, this man who's going now. Today, this afternoon, he sent me a beautiful message, you know, saying saying that they were about to give him the sedation. He was about to. So we'll be out of touch. Now I'm in touch through his wife and his sister, you know. And he said, but I am going to keep doing the practices that we've been doing because they have served me. And I know that, you know, I can do them with or without sedation. I'm just going to keep on doing them. And his wife and sister also said, look, as he goes, as Juan Ramon goes, you know, little by little through the sedation and his pain, he's in terrible pain right now, are calmed down and he goes into sleep, we will be still practicing. And what they're practicing is something very simple, which is just breathing, their presence, and connecting to themselves, to the space inside them, and connecting this to the immediate space around them, and on and on. And this is a classic Taoist practice of Yo and Wu, of connecting. I mean, I'm talking to the Tai Chi people now mainly, you know, that when we do our form, I think I said this in the last group meeting, you know, we're not just moving the body, the physical body, but we feel the space with which we're dancing, you know, with which we're moving. So this space is very alive, you know, and the space is not just around us and embracing us and what we move with, but it impregnates all our being. This is a sense of Wu. You have this phrase Wu Wei, you know, Wu Wei, when your actions come from this space, you know, they don't come from this tension of what do I do next, but they come from this very, very powerful but totally gentle, you know, movement, you know, without the tension of trying. So this is what you do in the Tai Chi, you know, when we move, and also never forget that when we come to the training, as you do in aikido, you know, what do you do at the door? You pause. You might give a little bow, you might just pause. Why do you pause? Because you are connecting to the dojo. You use that term, don't you, in there? Dojo. Dojo is the place of the Tao. It's the sacred place. So you pause at the door, not for etiquette. You pause because when you pause at the gate, you're connecting to the energy of the place. The emptiness of the place becomes alive. That is the dojo. See? So when I train doctors and nurses who are working in palliative care or intensive care, who accompany people who are about to die and so on, you know, I give them practices so that they look after themselves, and practices so they're really present and not just pretending to be, you know, and they're attentive and they're listening and so on. And they go beyond their roles as doctors and nurses. They're just human and connected and empathic, you know, to the person they're accompanying. But always at the end of the training, I say, well, what's the thing to never forget? You know? And they sort of hunt around and they find this and that. And we say, no, it's the pause at the door, whether that is the corner of a little sort of palliative care unit. You just pause. You pause for a second, because then that pause, that connection to the dojo means that you're bringing transcendence. You're bringing transcendence, again, big word, but very, very real experience. Transcendence just means something beyond your little self and your little fragile body and your little head, you know, which thinks it knows everything. The transcendence is just something beyond that. So when you pause for the dojo, you know, you allow the universe in. You allow the universe into what you're going to do. You're not just going, how can I help this person? What can I say? And all this tension is sometimes can be a very, very toxic factor. At the moment now, I'm working with groups of health professionals in Spain. who are getting through their post-traumatic syndrome stuff, you know, who are getting through their burnout from this past year, very strenuous, very exacting year. And a lot of the time it's because they've never had a practice. So the notion of of a secular spirituality, which you can't just talk about it. I mean, I'm just talking about it now because I'm sharing it with you, but it actually based on practice. You can't just keep on talking about it. You have to do it. You have to live it. And this is where the practices come in. But of course, you don't have to overlay that practice with language, exotic language, or language that people can't understand. Just make it understandable, but make sure it's that the practice is also solid. When I work with health professionals, particularly those who haven't any clue of spirituality, who've never meditated or practiced aikido or tai chi, I always say to them, look, what we're about to do this weekend or this day's workshop, approach it with two questions. What for? Why and what for? You know, and if you can't answer those questions, don't do it, because you just be you just be indulging. No time to indulge. So the practices in the field of death and dying, but particularly in the field of COVID in this last year, have had to be practices that actually help them either avoid getting burnt out or regaining their well-being when they're burnt out. And then there have been a lot of things that have come through the COVID that are like gifts, you know, for secular spirituality. I met all sorts of people this last year, professionals, who before the COVID, they could just coast along from goodwill, from good training, you know, doctors and nurses who just went around doing their work decently and well. But this hasn't been possible during COVID because the whole sort of atmosphere has changed, it's intensified. And for example, in Spain here, we had this extraordinary phenomenon of restricting, which I still find absurd, and many of my colleagues and many of the doctors and so on have found absurd. But the sense of not letting the families go and accompany those they love in the hospitals. So for months, people had to go and leave their loved ones with whom they'd shared a whole life, you know, in the lobby of a hospital or in the gates of a residence home. Can you imagine that? You know, you take your loved one and you just dump them there because the law doesn't allow you to go in for no good reason, really, because you could go in well protected. But this was the case. This was the case, and people are now still suffering from the post-trauma of that, of the feelings of guilt and terror and anger and everything like that, you know, are coming out. Now, as for the health professionals, my very first group was with nurses who said, we don't know what to do because we're in our gear, which is terrible for the nurses, you know, who are used to touching and, you know, hugging and offering, especially in Spain, you know, it's a very touchy society, like the Greeks, you know, but not being able to touch, having gloves and these plastic things and the mask and everything, not being able to really accompany total strangers too here. But worse than that, not knowing what to say to the families who are in complete distress at the gates of the residence home, you know, or downstairs in the lobby of a hospital, and the stress that built up, and not having any preparation, any training at all. And so, you know, that brings up the question, well, what training? Well, it's only spiritual training. You know? The other training they've got through their science, through their formation, through their nursing training, doctor training and everything. but not equipped as people.
Yeah, that's nicely.
I hope you're following me.
No, I am, yeah. So I mean, it's been very much a crash course for them, and actually for all the people you've accompanied over the years. It's a crash course at that point in kind of connecting with themselves and feeling at peace with the world, and connecting with whatever they want to connect.
Yeah.
But I suspect it's also been a bit of a crash course for you this year, and realizing the power of what you're offering and how important it is.
It's been challenging, very, very challenging. But also, I mean, I'm glad, I'm talking about this. This theme of secular spirituality suddenly comes into its own, because without some sort of spirituality, these professionals particularly have been completely lost and burnt out. So there's a very concrete result, and I remember my first group, about 25 nurses. I said, how many of you have any spiritual practice at all? And they said, well, we do some sports, and we walk, but anything like yoga or, Tai Chi, or no, nothing, And the same group now, a little more than half of them are doing some sort of Qigong, some sort of breathing practice and so on, because they've realized the need, that sports doesn't do it. To be sort of like muscularly informed doesn't help. It's the heart, it's the spirit that needs to be well. If you're going to carry on doing a job that is so challenging, like looking after dying people every day, you better be connected to something that transcends you, from where you derive your energy, and to where you give back all the stuff that you absorb in your day's work, which is resonance, which is vibration. What are the vibrations? Fear, anger, deep sadness, desperation, panic, total distress.
And so everything we experience, Tew, is through the body. It's an embodied process. That's how we experience it. So how much do you teach through the body that to get these messages across?
Almost all. I mean, I've got my Greek friends here. They'll tell you that, if I, when I get started, I actually do the work rather than come on and speak about it. It's all through the body. I start from below. So, and then I refer to traditional Chinese medicine, which treats the flow of energy, of qi, through your body. But one thing that a lot of people don't take into account, especially when the situation is very demanding and very intense, is the resonance. And everybody who works sort of on an intimate level with another person, I'm talking about, let's say, social workers, will know this. You go home and you can be living well, you can be looking after yourself, but you will get very burnt out soon if you don't have some practice to renew. Why? Because you're picking up the negative resonance all the time.
Right.
And these negative resonance, they just completely invade you. Right. And by the way, this is it's a Taoist term, gan ying in Chinese, resonance, to treat resonance very seriously, and to have the means to cleanse these resonance. But if you don't, and if your hours are long and you're picking up all this resonance all the time, sports won't do it. Well, even sort of Tai Chi and yoga and stuff won't do it unless you focus on certain exercises and practices that allow you to liberate these resonances from these potentially toxic resonances from your organism. So this again is a spiritual matter. This is a spiritual corporal matter. See.
So one of the things that I was always told in ki aikido, because that's my tradition, was that we're all extending ki all the time, and the more you give, the more you get. So it strikes me that with this resonance that you're discussing, there's a sense of getting blocked, and you have to unblock and get it all flowing again, sort of clean out the system. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, but I'd like to add that there's a paradox here too, which you have to take care of, which is that the more you work on yourself, on your ki, your chi, the more sensitive you become, and the more open you become, and the more you can pick up and you can sense the vibrations around you, of people around you, the person in front of you, for example. When you're standing in front of them, you sense, you feel the vibrations much more. So with that increase in sensitivity, you must have an equally strong practice in order to not absorb.
Right.
See? And because you're no longer sort of behind armoring, if you like, now you're absorbing, and that ability to absorb and to hear and to respond to other people's resonances, of course, help you in the work. But there's a price to pay, and the price is that if you don't look after yourself on that level of chi, and chi as resonance, then you will start accumulating. And this is a factor that wears down a lot of people, like teachers. I've met, teachers, therapists, psychologists, apart from health workers.
Yes, absolutely. So this really is a practice. How are you doing for time? And
I'm fine. Nobody's called yet.
Okay. By the way, before I forget, please pass on our thanks to his family if you don't get the chance to pass it on personally to one, because it's been most enlightening, and actually you've cut through it all for me, and now I kind of understand how it can be deemed to be a spiritual path and what secular spirituality means, and I understand how what I'm practicing could be deemed to be a spiritual path on that level. So it's worked for me. Is there anything else you wanted to add on that?
Oh, loads and loads, when I but I won't.
What springs to mind is now I can relate the work you're doing to actually the martial art practice, and why that would be a spiritual path, because the more you advance, the more resonance you pick up, the more sensitive you become, the more you need to practice to be able to clear out your system and to stay healthy, etc., etc. It makes kind of sense.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, you see, I think this term secular spirituality, it's kind of taking the specialness out of the word spirituality, which is, it's like meditation. Meditation. It brings up. I remember the first time I was in front of about 1,000 doctors. It was about palliative care, and they brought me in as the spiritual guy. So I started, and they said, "Can you talk to them about meditation?" Because the organizers wanted these doctors to meditate. This is many years ago in Spain. So I started talking about meditation. And I could see their face, at least the first 20 rows. The faces fell, I could practically see the think bubbles, thinking meditation, candles, incense, gurus, whatever it was, and the resistance was just palpable immediately. So I said, listen, I was going to talk to you about meditation, but I won't, I'm going to talk to you about resting in silence. Who needs a rest? They all put their hands up. Who needs some silence? They all put their hands up. So I said, well, let's do a session of resting in silence. And that was fine. That's when I learned that semantics sometimes really gets in the way,
Yes.
You talk, because there's a lot of baggage there. But the other thing is, when you take away that specialness of spirituality, You know, the very simple things. I'm sure you have the same exercises in aikido, of this being centered and grounded.
Yeah.
It's just being centered and grounded, just being in the middle. And in Tai Chi, we call it Zhong and Song, you know, or Fu and Song. This sense, this skill that you practice of returning to the center, grounding your chi, grounding your presence. This is a completely earthly practice, but it's also completely spiritual, because distress is when there's fragmentation. You know, distress is when a person cannot regain their center, cannot feel the ground. And there's anxiety, there's anguish, there's distress, all sorts of things, you know, which are spiritual, in fact, spiritual disharmonies, if you like. So one of the first things I do with health professionals is just really simply, you know, showing them how simple it is to just bring the energy back to the center and ground with the in-breath and ground it with the out-breath, and just feel it through the body, not thinking of presence, not thinking of the center, not thinking of the ground, but feeling the center and feeling the ground, just as you do in your discipline, I'm sure. And this is a spiritual practice. This simple practice is a basic spiritual practice. It's not about, you know, it's not about sort of tripping, if you like, you know, it's not opening this and opening the third eye or whatever it is. It's just feeling your belly, you know, your hara, and then the ground.
It's very pragmatic. So it's
pragmatic.
It's
pragmatic. So this is another thing about secular spirituality. Could I just mute myself one moment, please?
Of course. Guys, while Tew mutes and handles this, have any of you got any questions or points that you would like to raise? So beginning, if you'd like to think about that a little bit, it won't be too long before we get to that session. And obviously when we get there, you'll have to unmute to ask the question.
Brilliant.
Yes. For once I can understand today, Paul.
Okay, all going well.
Good. Pleased to hear that. So I used the word pragmatic and then the phone went.
Yes, pragmatic. Must be useful, yes. You know, applicable. It's not to...
And relatable.
And relatable. Yes. And what is relatable, applicable, is what is then collective, you know? You're not in your own vision. Oh, I've had this amazing, and this is where the drug experiences often fall down. You might, you know, open up and have extraordinary experiences. How do you translate them to somebody else? You know, how do you share this?
Yeah.
And if it's not shareable, it's kind of like very private, and the usual individualism, you know, in all this, and then mixed with that is spirituality, where, you know, you've got this person who thinks they've hit the jackpot, and they've got all these experiences and the power in their hand, the power in their mind, because they've done all this practice and stuff like that, you know. But where is it shared? What you know, what good does it do in the world for the injustice in the world, for climate change? So pragmatic in a very real sense, you know.
Yeah, and it takes it so much further away from the purely martial.
Well, I would say it is the martial. This is the deepest part of martial arts. Aikido or Tai Chi, this is the deepest part. It's the transformation, which doesn't mean you change into something else, but you change into what you are. You connect. But spirituality for me means deep humanity. It means the level of humanity we touch on anyway. Like for instance, I don't know, when you listen to great music, you know, and you're transported, or you're in you know, the Greeks will know this very well, you know, the beauty of the power of the landscape can take you away in awe, in wonder, you know. And this is the spirituality, you know, as well. This transcendent feeling.
You've got to do martial arts well. You have to be incredibly connected with yourself, don't you, to be able to be calm in the moment and totally experience it and not feel panicked by it and stay grounded and centered and all those other words.
And don't forget that in Tai Chi anyway, where we refer to the Tao Te Ching, for instance, you know, the Tao Te Ching is always talking about this, that the possibility of going beyond the dual trap that we're in, which is fear and violence. You know, I think the martial arts, the beautiful part of the martial arts in spiritual terms, is that it challenges us to explore, at least to explore, you know, the possibility that we have something finer than that fear and violence, dualism in us, you know. And this is, and I think, I mean, to me, I'm grateful to the martial arts for that it's a direct way and not a philosophical way, because a lot of people want non-violence, peace, but they haven't dealt with fear and violence in themselves. Yes. I think what the martial arts does is it offers a chance to actually face it, and face it for real, with somebody trying to throw you or whatever it is, or kick your head or whatever, you know, and learning how to not lose your center and your groundedness in that, you know, and to not return that, to not react, but to respond. All these are spiritual values, I feel. And they're values, when we talk of spirituality, we have to talk about love and compassion. But as we're trying to get there, we have to deal with all that's unloving and uncompassionate, you know, and defensive, our little selves, so defensive, so competitive, so fragile. And I think the martial arts can teach you how to connect with something finer than that fearful little selves.
Yes, I think that's right. So I think at this point, I'm going to open it up to the audience and see what they want to offer, either by way of question or comment. So raise your hand, and I will change the gallery view so I can see that. Hang on a second. Okay, who'd like to ask a question or has a point they'd like to raise? I can't believe none of you have. Oh, Judith, you have. So open up your mic.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much, Tew. I've been very moved by many of the things I've heard tonight. One thing in particular that resonated with me, that felt similar to what I've learned through doing aikido, is that it's about being selfless. If the ki flows into you and you let it flow out again and you don't use it yourself, then much more flows through you. So that seemed to resonate.
I just want to comment on that, because, you know, again, going to the health workers who I work with, and who, you know, sometimes they get burnt out and so on. I said, well, how do you work? Where do you get your energy? See? And they say, I don't know, never thought of it. You know, I just get up in the morning, I go to work, I do my work, you know. And obviously it comes from their effort. And it struck me how few of them have this sense of what you've just said, what you've just described, of being the channel for the chi, you know, and letting something come through you that way, you know, that way into the world, into the people you're helping. And then that way as well, so that you stay light and empty. You don't hold it here. See? And it's a very important thing. And I'm sure you have lovely practices in aikido for this, you know, this letting it flow through, and not holding it. So in Tai Chi, for instance, you know, we live through that at the end of a move, you know, to allow the energy to be felt totally, and then to let it go. To let it go. That's the point, not hold it.
This sense of being connected to the collective resonates with me, in the sense that if you're part of the collective, there's an infinite source of energy. If it's just you trying to battle against the world, it's a bit tougher.
First of all, I could not agree with you more that, you know, we've come out, I think, of this time of you alone will solve it. Do you know what I mean? That arrogance that we sometimes, I've certainly lived through that. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it. But this sense is like, you know, unified. The collective does it, not the one person. And the other thing is, again, going back to Judith's point, when you have both the sense of collective, you know, in a sense of collective humanity, and a sense of this collective being part of something that transcends you all, you know, then it can be very powerful.
Yes. Hugh, you got a question or point?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, when you were talking about resonance, you were talking about liberating toxins.
Yes.
And certainly I'm sure some others sort of tend to think of that as a physical thing. So we can understand the physical removal of toxins. I'd like to ask whether the mental process of removing toxins is just the same thing, or is it a slightly different path?
How could I answer you that? You know, when we talk about toxins of resonance, let's say you are continually, let's say in your workplace, with somebody who's continually angry, right, or impatient. Now, I think we've all lived through this, you know? That affects us. That affects us through the organic resonance, because we are resonant, we are electromagnetic, you know? And just as when you are angry, you affect somebody else. You don't even have to say anything, but your vibrations will already be affecting them. You yourself are absorbing that, see? So if you're going to deal with that only mentally, by just knowing it and saying, well, it's okay, you know, I realize that he's angry and he's not me, and so on, all that helps. It helps to be clear mentally of what's happening and to admit that. But it has to be complemented by an actual practice, you know? And this is, we do a practice which we call the 6 sounds, which is an ancient Qigong sort of practice in order to cleanse, where you actually sing the sounds out. You connect to the emotions and you sing the sounds out. So then it works on the physical, emotional, and mental level. Because mentally, you've realized that the mental part comes in realizing, wow, all this week I have been with this, I've been absorbing, you know, and not doing anything about it. And so you're pent up, right, mentally. Emotionally, you know, the resonance makes your heart beat faster, right? It raises your blood pressure to be near somebody like that all the time. We're infected. And of course, physically, it's very obvious, you know? So when you do, if you have a practice that can include the whole 3, which with movement, with sound, and with the mentating, the clearing from the mind, then there's a chance to not keep accumulating it. Okay. Does that answer you?
Yes.
Hi, Tew. It's lovely to see you and hear you again. I think this is a fascinating subject, and just while you were chatting, I love words, and I looked up the word spirituality. You know, you Google the word spirituality, and two definitions right next to each other are quality that involves deep feelings and beliefs of a religion. That's one. And then
Sorry, I didn't
Can you
catch
say that again, Piers? Your sound went.
the quality that involves deep feelings and beliefs of a religious nature. That's the first definition. And then immediately underneath it is spirituality is about seeking a meaningful connection with something bigger than yourself, which can result in positive emotions such as peace, awe, contentment, gratitude, and acceptance. And I think there aren't that many words where you can say the word spirituality and it can mean almost the opposite to something else. And it's been really, really great listening to someone that has explained it in such a way that it hasn't had anything to do with religion. And it's been so refreshing. It's been great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for saying so. If when I'm invited to talk about this, I sometimes refer to the Latin spiritum.
That was underneath the second one. That's so weird.
Spiritum, which
Yes.
is breath, you know.
Yes.
And often with people who kind of like, you know, don't get it even after talking and so on. I often do something very, very simple. I don't know whether I want to end with this, right? Kind of end with this. Why don't we get up? Or just find space. You don't have to get up, actually. Just find space. Can you find space? Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to get up, in fact. But if you prefer getting up, and I do this, I say, okay, let's finish with talking, right? Let's just breathe together. So sometimes, I think I did this with you when we did the yin and yang talk, but when we breathe in, let's just open the circle. We just breathe in, we open the circle. And when we breathe out, we just make a line. We push a line, not too far. So breathing in, let's do it together. Breathing in, and then breathing out. Nothing more complicated than this. And again, just feel it, the circle, which is the yin, the receptive, and then the line, which is the straight and the expressive. Okay. One more. Okay, now with a little more intention, a little more awareness as well of what we're doing. So again, each of us is doing the same thing, but slightly different. So the in-breath and out-breath are our breathing, without which we wouldn't be alive. So let's focus on our breathing as function. So each of us breathes differently. Our breathing is unique to each of us. Depends if you're a smoker, if you're in a contaminated town, if you have allergies, if you have illness that affects your lungs. All of this is personal to us, is unique to us. So your lungs are definitely not my lungs. And the way you breathe is unique to you, even though what we're sharing here is the universal need of breathing. Now let's just rest one moment. And now just shifting your intention, your awareness. Now, instead of focusing on the function of your breathing, focus on the breath, which we all take in and it goes back to itself. It enters and it leaves. So the breath. And this is spiritum. So there's function and individuality and uniqueness and singularity. And then there's breath, which is the universal part, the collective, which does not belong to anybody, nor can be expressed by anybody or possessed by anybody. And we don't need a priest or a guru or a monk to tell us this, if we could just live it. And we don't need to reject our individuality to connect with a collective. One more. I think I've got to go.
Well, before you go, let me thank you for a really wonderful session, and thank Demetra for coming up with the idea. Really enlightening and really helpful. So carry on the wonderful work you do, and we hope to see you again before too long.
Great to see you all again. Have a great summer. Stay
Thank
well.
you very much.
Stay well. Take care of your spirit. And we'll see each other soon. Early Nikta. Yeah.
Nikta, we miss you. Come to Greece.
I will try. Right.
All right. Bye, one and all. Just to let you know, next week we'll be with Charles Colton looking at Aikido in the schools and all the wonderful work that he's done there. See you then.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Pleasure.
For coming.
Yeah, thank you so much.